Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Ignorant Conversations podcast, a casual discussion between two friends about different types of books we read every week. I'm your co host, Daoud, and my friend here is Mobin. And this week, we're going to talk about a book written by the former Secretary of State, Madeleine Albright. It's called Fascism, A Warning. Yeah, I didn't like it that much, honestly.
Well, how come? Did you not like the book? Or the person who's written it?
Oh no, I honestly I didn't know much about her anyway, so I had no kind of bias against her or for her policies or politics. I don't know anything about her that much. I liked the first half of the book where she's discussing what fascism is. How do you define it? How do you detect it? Different like the fascists we had in history, such as Mussolini and Hitler, and the modern types. And then the second half of the book, she just look. Here's how I think about it. Let's say some guy's racist or fascist, okay? And you want to change his mind. How do you go about changing his mind, in your opinion?
I mean, for racism, you got to see where it really stems from. It could stem from, insecurities, or it could stem from, let's say, that's just how those people have been brought up, and they don't have access to people from other cultures or other races, and that creates this fear of the other.
Hmm.
Something along those lines, I guess, for racism.
Okay, and racism and fascism can be pretty closely linked, especially in today's world, which I'm going to be discussing in a bit. But all right, so let's say we have a bunch of people who are not exposed to people from other races, other cultures, other ethnicities, etc., etc. So they're just afraid of the unknown. So how do you tell these people that without insulting them, whether how they're thinking is wrong? I mean, it's you can't
Yeah,
just shout them out. I mean, it's like, for example, you know how like somebody, some like celebrity or some kind of high profile case you see on social media or just media in general, some guy's fired for being racist or making a racist comment. He's fired or she's fired from her job. I mean, all
yeah.
you've done is just fired a racist guy who's probably now even more racist. He's more hateful because he or she has lost his or her job. You haven't really fixed the issue.
But it also sends a message, sort of like it's necessary to send a message to everyone that this is something that's not acceptable.
It is. You're sending a message, but all you're doing is just firing racists. They're going to lose their job, and they're just more likely to band together now. A bunch of guys who've
You
lost
think
their
so?
jobs. Yeah, definitely. I mean, isn't that kind of evident from just looking at politics all over the world? Look at, let's say,
No.
United States now. People are talking about the Southern way of thinking or the Southern culture. How about you? They want to preserve a certain way of life and blah 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 blah. But
Yeah.
perhaps what they're saying is not entirely racist in its nature, even though the history has a very racist past. But they feel like that because they feel like their way of living is slowly being taken away, right? It's being replaced by a different kind of living, and they don't want
So
that,
you,
so they vote for like Donald Trump, right?
so you're saying that even if people are overtly or covertly racist, just sort of like firing them or taking that sort of actions against them might, it will send a message that racism is not acceptable, but it doesn't necessarily solve the actual problem. For that, you need to be able to showcase or like indicate to people like this isn't necessarily an attack on them, because people take it personally, but rather an
Definitely.
attack on like racist ideology. And
Yeah.
we need to explain why racist ideology is not acceptable,
Yeah.
though you would
You
think that
you
in this
it,
day and age, that's something that you don't need to do, that it would be self-evident.
it comes from a lack of education regarding something, right? It's a lack of
Yeah,
knowledge. So you taking away their source of livelihood, which is their work, is not going to give them any knowledge,
right.
right?
And you're saying that essentially, you're saying that the pushback against racism is linked to fascism in the current day and age?
I think so.
Okay, could you elaborate based on what you read?
So going back to the book for a second, she discussed the roots, the beginning of fascism, and the first fascist in history who used the word. I mean, yeah, I mean, you could say, Julius Caesar was a fascist, but I mean, that's kind of ridiculous statement
Mm,
because I mean, sure, he was an authoritarian ruler and stuff, but he was a fascist as opposed to what, right?
right.
Fascism is a term that came about in the 20th century, and it was coined by Mussolini, from the word fascere, I guess, which is an old word used in the Roman Empire, meaning it's like a bundle of sticks that could be used, tied together and form an axe. That's the original meaning of the word fascere.
Wow, okay. That
Yeah,
sounds
so you
pretty
could,
violent.
right? Because it represents the whole idea of fascism pretty well. Right? I mean, all of us together. Mussolini was basically saying, we need to retain the past glories of the Roman Empire. The people must be strong and blah 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 blah. Because many people don't think about it, but there was a big risk of communism being spread across Italy.
Right.
Yeah, and basically Mussolini's ideas was just a backlash against that, and that obviously won because he became the leader, and he talked about how you want to, the people's past were so much better, they had better lives, everybody was just like a glorious hero, and we're going to retain that, we're going to retain the empire. And he did that by attacking Ethiopia, I think, and then eventually he also tried attacking Greece, which was the biggest mistake for him. Well, I guess that's a good thing in
Right.
hindsight. But fascism is mainly centered around people, like populism, and which we had a discussion before the podcast. Populism is not necessarily a bad thing, right? Because you could do things for the people. You could be a politician, talk about the people, and talk about what they can do for themselves and what you can do for them without being fascist. So fascism
Right.
is basically a populist and extreme form of authoritarian rule. That's what
Okay.
fascism is. And she seems
And
to
and the
agree on that.
purpose is like in fascism, essentially the whoever the authoritarian ruler is, they want to they show you dreams or like they reference a glorious past, something that they wish to return to. They seek more power and they act like a populist ruler in that sense, and they sort of like stir up people's emotions, bring these
Exactly.
evoke these emotions regarding the past and where you
Yeah,
want to return to, and they claim that the only way to do that is by having an unfettered power. Is that correct?
that's exactly right. So
Okay.
you look at the Nazi regime, right?
Yeah.
The only way you can retain Germany's past glory, because Germany lost World War One, really wasn't a bad situation after World War One. So Hitler was saying, no, this is not the German way of living. We gotta take back what's ours, and we gotta maintain our superiority, evident superiority over others. And the only way we can do so is by putting all power into one place. We cannot have all these guys bickering over nothing, and democracy just leads to like a standstill, like a political standstill, because one guy wants something, the other guy wants something else, so nothing's being done, right?
Right. And
So,
that's where
so
like the theory comes from that, had there not been such crippling sanctions on Germany and so much humiliation of the German state, then we might have been able to prevent World War II.
yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's basically fascism, and that's the two examples of classic fascists. So that's the beginning of the book, and also she discusses some other people, but for the sake of maintaining time, we're just gonna gloss over some of them, and we're gonna move on to the modern ones. So she discussed plenty of modern day fascists, but pinnacle, the epitome of a modern fascist is probably Putin, Russia's Putin.
Right.
I mean, he's the guy that even on a global scale, all the other wannabe fascists look up to him, right? They all become friends with him. They all,
Yeah.
maintain a relationship with Russia, military relationship. I mean, if you look at the situation in Syria or anywhere else, like right now, there's
Or
some stuff going
Ukraine.
on. And yeah, if there's more than one player in a political situation such as Syria, and they're leaning towards the fascist side of things, they're going to be friends with Putin no matter what, right?
Right.
No way they're going to go against him. So the modern day fascist basically isn't as is doesn't openly discuss giving all the power to one party or one state, right? Because clearly that was the case in World War II. Didn't work out, but then the Well, I mean, it did work out, right? The communists were allies with the allies were basically
Yeah.
they won, and then eventually Soviet Union fell. So this whole idea of giving all the power to one state didn't work. So what they do is they just kind of hide their ideologies behind democratic practices, right? So
Right.
yes, we're gonna have elections. Yes, you're gonna have freedom of speech or press. Blah 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 blah. And in the beginning, they might truly be democratic, but that's just temporary. It's just enough democracy to get them in a position where they can start removing these things, like a free and fair election. So, for example, elections still happen in Russia. Are they fair? No, they're not.
Yeah, that's the case. And in
We're
fact,
talking.
Russia has this. It has a MO. It's basically like this happened specifically during the pandemic, and even
Hmm.
recently I read about it. If there's anyone that goes against the state, they end up committing suicide by jumping out of the window. And it's just like it's such an obvious thing that I'm surprised they don't change up the tactic, the intelligence agencies, because there were a couple of doctors that complained about, that the pandemic spread really fast. We don't have enough protective, like personal protective equipment, and Putin is undermining the threat, and he's claiming that it's just pneumonia or something along those lines because clearly Russia's not in a good place economically or in
Right.
any in anything positive.
Yeah, maybe
Um,
except the military, which is the classic.
yeah, that's true. And it, well, they talked about this and they raised awareness regarding this, and apparently they jumped out of the window and committed suicide. Um, and recently, a police personnel complained about reported his superior for corruption, and he needed some fresh air too, apparently, because the next day he jumped out of the window and committed suicide.
Well, honestly,
So
man, I don't know. I don't know what the hell you're talking about because back in the day, man, these guys would just commit suicide by stabbing themselves in the belly like 64 times. So
yeah,
I don't
the
know.
CIA's MO when they two shots to the back of the head, and apparently that's suicide.
That's suicide. Yeah, the first one didn't work, and he was like, "Ah, shit. Let me try again."
Yeah, anything for the CIA.
Anything for
Yeah,
the CIA, man. You gotta make
that's
it
true.
look.
We digress, but you were talking about like how they like modern day fascists. They
Hmm.
come under the guise of some sort of democratic principles. They'll
Exactly.
say they come into power and they say, yeah, we're gonna uphold democratic principles. The press is gonna be free. There's not going to be any censorship. It's gonna be free and fair election. But slowly, as the years progress or as time progresses, they start taking away these freedoms and start going towards what they really wanted, which is an authoritarian rule.
Exactly. Yeah.
All right.
That's
And so,
basically what
how
they
does
do.
my question? Like I mentioned, I remember you mentioned in the beginning. You said that the book talks about like what exactly is fascism, how we should define it, and also how to detect it. So I think like everyone will be curious, and I'm curious as well. So when people come under the guise of democratic principles, we're all going to vote them in, let's say, provided that they have the correct policies that we're interested in. But, how do you detect beforehand that this is someone who has a tendency to turn into an authoritarian rule? This is something that has a tendency to, switch towards fascism. Like, how do you detect that beforehand before either bringing them into power or like before it becomes too late? Is that something that the book talks about or you have an opinion on?
Well, the book. You see, my one of the biggest problems I had with the book is it looks like it's heading towards. I mean, it is asking the questions you just asked me very
Yeah.
clearly, but she does not give a clear answer to any of these questions. So
Hmm.
she does talk
Okay.
about how the book is called Fascism a Warning. Okay, so a warning, you should give me a clear, right? Like a very clear, almost bullet point,
Yeah.
set of observations I can see and be like, okay, yeah, well, this guy's, a potential fascist. I should be careful. But
Right.
it does not do that necessarily. So what it does is, yes, it does say things like, you should be careful if a guy is like, trying to limit your freedom of speech, but like, oh my god, like I couldn't figure that out about myself. And I think
Yeah, I
she
mean that's
struggles
fairly
to,
obvious.
yeah, and I think she struggles to answer the question properly because it's very difficult if a guy is hiding behind the guise of democracy. It's very difficult to detect, right? That this guy is going to turn out to be a, like a douchebag later. In my opinion, the whole idea of democracy is that it has a check and balance system, right? You have one institution that prevents another institution from having too much power, and there's another
Right.
institution from having that institution from having too much power, right? So you should always be focusing on these institutions. Make sure that there's a balance to them, and make sure that you're not going to elect a person who potentially could topple the system's balance, right, towards
Mm.
one side or the other.
Is
And
that something that is that your personal opinion, or is
that
that
is my
something that?
personal opinion,
Mm,
honestly.
I agree with that in the sense that if you have strong institutions, then those institutions will sort of like they have checks and balances in place. So if they're strong enough,
Right.
that even if the political party changes or if a new person comes into power, it'll take some time to unravel the workings of those institutions, and that
Exactly.
time makes clear what this person's intention is regarding them.
Yeah.
But how would you
Uh,
recommend, for example, like you and I are from developing countries? In some cases, like if you take some European states, even though in the book you read talks about some European states also coming under fascist rule in the modern day and age. But for
mhm.
developing countries, when you're sort of working to get those institutions set up, and they're not necessarily in place, like I just wanted your opinion. How do you think one should go about detecting, or like how we should prevent such fascist or such authoritative personalities from coming into power? Because, like, if you take the Philippines,
Mhm.
I think Duterte, I don't know if that's how you pronounce it, but
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, he's clearly an authoritarian yeah,
Oh
ruler,
yeah, definitely, definitely.
and he's getting these, drug dealers or anyone else that's clear, like, if there's anyone in his opposition, he gets them killed in a police encounter.
Yeah,
Um,
just it reminds me of a really good Dave Chappelle joke. You know Dave
yeah,
Chappelle, the comedian?
yeah.
Yeah, I remember. So like the police would just kill a black guy. I mean, he
And
was
then
like an
drop
innocent
crack.
guy. Drop crack on him and just say he was a drug dealer. That's basically his entire
Yeah,
policy is like that. Just kill him and just say he's a drug dealer, and it's fine.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. So then, how do you like? How do you recommend that, like, the people of that country? How should they recognize that this is a person that has such tendencies, and this is a person who could have this, uh, you know, do this much damage, and then prevent that person from coming into power?
Well, that's a good question, man, and it's a really difficult answer, especially you're asking a guy who basically doesn't know much. But I can try my best, and
Let's hear
if
it. We can discuss it. Let's figure it out.
yeah, well, all right, look, all right, if we're talking about specifically electing a person, then
Yeah,
we should be looking at maybe somewhere where presidents have a lot of power, and not necessarily it's like a parliament where power is kind of divided between many people, right?
that's fair.
Because I mean, in my opinion, if you're talking about a country that is trying to transition into a democracy, I think it's a much better idea to have a parliament. It's a parliamentary system, not a presidential system.
Right. Because
You don't
yeah,
want, yeah,
absolutely.
right. You don't want to give all this power to one guy. You want to kind of
So
divide it into many people.
that's step one. Have a
Yeah, that's
parliamentary
the
system.
have a parliamentary system. Don't allocate all executive power into the hands of one guy,
Right.
right?
And then
Um,
also maybe, I mean, I don't know if these countries, because we're talking about countries that don't necessarily have the best institutions, but
mhm.
I guess, yeah, if we talk about in terms of like what makes it less likely for you to get an authoritarian power person, in the seat of power, it's if you have a parliamentary system that decreases the chances, and if
Definitely.
you have a good judicial system, or if you have good institutions, governmental institutions, that decreases the likelihood of something like this happening.
Yeah.
wouldn't you say that? Well, the U.S. has a presidential system. I would
See,
say it has good institutions.
well, yes, it does. That's true. The problem with the United States is it's generally was perhaps was considered. I can't say is anymore, like the forefront of you know democracy, right? This is how a
Right.
democracy should look like, and I don't think they fit that description necessarily anymore. Yes, they have great
Yeah, I agree.
institutions comparatively, but is it good enough to be labeled as what you can achieve as a as close as you can get to a perfect democracy in today's world? I don't think so. I don't think they fit that description.
I understand. Would you say then, like, besides the thing when we talked about have a parliamentary system, have good institutions, have a good judicial system, to say that people should be hesitant of voting in somebody who has never been in office before?
You would think that would be pretty obvious, right?
I mean, in that sense, like if, for example, Trump had been a senator or he'd run any sort of office, if he'd been a representative, you'd seen the things he'd passed his votes on. You would have a better understanding of, where he lies on the political spectrum. What's he
Exactly.
willing to do to get things done? And what are the kinds of things he's willing to get done? And if you had
Exactly.
an understanding of that, you'd have a better knowledge of who this guy is. But then the other aspect is, for example, maybe like if your whole system is corrupt or if everything's messed up and you just can't find somebody. Like one of the reasons people voted him in was because they said he was an outsider. That just might be the way to go sometimes. So if you remove somebody who's never been in office before, you kind of limit the talent pool that you have for this. So, where's the balance there? So,
Well, yeah, two things about that. The first thing is about the when you said that if you elect a guy who's been in office before, then you can clearly look at his policies or what has he been saying for the past years, and you can predict where he's going, right? And just to add to that,
yeah,
if he just suddenly decides to just completely change his stance or just kind of take a left turn somewhere that's incredibly strange, you can
yeah,
always use whatever he was saying before against him, right? I mean, as opposed to if you have a guy who's never been into office and just starts saying weird stuff, you cannot use anything against him because he didn't have anything before. You cannot say, "Hey, why the hell are you talking about building walls all of a sudden? I thought you were a Democrat. You like immigrants. Why
yeah,
did you cannot say that." Secondly, when you talked about having a guy who's not been in office is kind of like an outsider, perhaps that's the way to
yeah,
go. Honestly, man, like let's be honest. You're talking about a presidential system where elections occur every 4 years, and you cannot have a president
yeah,
serving
that's fair.
more than 2 terms. Like, what do you expect is going to happen? Okay, let's say this outsider is going to come. What is he going to do? What is he going to achieve for you that the other guys couldn't? I mean, the issue with the United States, you could say perhaps was, I mean, it's an issue that happens frequently because of the way the system is. You have one guy who gets elected and he wants to implement certain policies or change certain things. In 4 years' time or 8 years' time, he's going to have to leave. So the other guy
Yeah,
who gets elected, he can just kind of start removing or changing whatever the other guy was doing.
yeah, dismantling everything he set up.
Exactly. So you kind of, it's kind of like a political paralysis. You're not moving anywhere. So the people can get
Sort of
fed up
like when
with this.
Obama
Mhm.
came and he set up, Medicare for all, Obamacare, and then Trump's like, all right, time to take this apart.
Exactly. Exactly.
Hmm.
That's the issue that a system like the USA system can have, which
Yeah.
this is more difficult to happen in a parliamentary system, by the way. So
So you're
when
saying
you,
to prevent fascism, presidential system isn't the way to go.
in my opinion, yes. I mean,
Yeah.
or especially if you're a country that is transitioning into democracy, having a
Hmm.
presidential system is taking a huge risk.
My
Mhm.
counter to that is you take, okay, we all know that fascism is terrible. We've seen historical cases of it being terrible beyond proportions when you take Mussolini and Hitler into account, when you take
Mhm.
current fascists like Putin. You take these into account and you see like clearly it has terrible implications for everyone except the fascist leader himself or herself and any cronies that they have within the party who are benefiting
Yeah,
off this,
yeah,
and they're utilizing people's emotions and people's fear of others, people's desire for something. that might have actually never existed sometimes to take control and benefit off of this. But at the
Hmm.
same time, and I'm not specifically talking about fascists, I'm talking about you know authoritarian rulers
Okay.
who actually did well for their countries. So, for example, we take South Korea and North Korea as examples. So Kim Jong Un is terrible, terrible leader. Anyways, like he's a terrible leader. He's not done well, and it's called a
Yeah.
hermit kingdom for a reason. And people starve there, and there's no formal economy there. It's like by all senses, it's
Hmm.
not doing well. We take South Korea, and South Korea's developed tremendously fast. It's a really strong economy in East Asia, and they're doing quite well for themselves. And they've made some stellar companies now. But
Hmm.
but for a long time, South Korea was under the control of a dictator,
Hmm.
and I forget the time period or the time span it was there, but it was quite a long time. And he sort of like put the emphasis on the industries, and because when South Korea was made, they sort of pushed for this, and it helped really fast track the development. Because in some cases, democracy does take time to sort of like make those decisions. Is this
It
okay? You
definitely
bypass
does.
it, you get the votes, and it's the same in Singapore. Singapore has had a one party system. I mean, like one party's mostly been in control for since the beginning almost, and even now, like the most recent Singaporean election, there was
Hmm.
a sort of like an upset, but the upset was still like for the most part the same party won again. And Singapore's done phenomenally well for itself
Hmm.
as a tiny city state. So there are examples of authoritarian rulers actually having that success, and
Definitely.
like really bypassing sort of like the, let's say, the stranglehold that democracy sometimes has on economic development, and they've done really well for themselves. So like, how do you like do you think, I imagine a lot of times when people are willing to give power and freedom up, is they're hoping to sort of emulate the success of Singapore or South Korea or places like that.
Okay.
And what they don't realize is they end up getting the short end of the stick, and they get something like Duterte, or you get Putin or something along those lines. But would you say then that one should never be willing to give up that freedom? Or, do your due diligence. If it seems like this person giving him that freedom will actually, bring that sort of economic success, you should be willing to take that risk.
So you're bringing up a great point. So let's look at South Korea.
Yeah.
So basically, during that time period, which you're referring to, they were
Yeah.
trying to implement this idea, ISI, which is basically import substitution industrialization, right?
Okay.
And it's a fairly simple thing. The economic policy is, basically saying whatever stuff you're importing, and let's say you're importing a
Mm-hmm.
lot of stuff, you want to start producing these things and export them, and kind
Right.
of fix that problem, boost your economy. Import substitution industrialization. South Korea wasn't the only country that was trying to do it. It was just the one that did it successfully. You can
Mm-hmm.
also look at India and Turkey, who also were trying to implement ISI but failed. Let's say you have a situation where let's say there's an upcoming election and one guy or one political party is trying to perhaps implement more authoritarian policies to kind of maybe boost the economy or something along those lines. And you want to know if it's a good idea to vote for him or not, right? Because as you said, it could really backfire or it could really work, as in the case of South Korea.
Yeah.
Honestly, I would say you have to do your homework. Let's look at why South Korea succeeded and why India failed. If you
Mm-hmm.
study it and understand it, logically apply it to your own situation, and you can make an educated decision. This is my answer to the situation. I mean, I cannot say never vote for it or always do this because there are cases in the world, like you said, with South Korea, Singapore, and plenty of other Far Eastern countries, where a brief term time period of authoritarian rule really benefited. But by the way, then they did transition into democracies. With the case of South Korea,
Right.
this wasn't permanent, and
Yeah. Yeah.
so you could make the argument that yes, definitely a temporary term of authoritarian rule could have a great positive impact on the economy, but
Mm.
not a long term one. So
I guess maybe even that's why. I mean, these things, these are such complicated situations that there's never a sort of rule book. if there was, all the countries would be happy
Oh yeah,
and
definitely.
economically doing well. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I guess to summarize, the way we see it is okay. A lot of yeah. So preferably, you want a parliamentary system, right? And
Hmm.
one should always do their due diligence regarding any person that they vote into power.
Do your
You
homework.
know,
Yeah.
do your homework basically.
One other thing to add. Here's the thing with elections and politics, especially now with USA taking like the majority of space in mainstream media, right? U.S.
Yeah,
elections, U.S. politics. Like, don't fall for the sensationalized politics, right?
yeah, yeah,
I vote for
absolutely.
Trump because Trump looks like a man I can have a drink with. Look, man, you're not gonna have a drink with him. Trump is gonna be in charge of like implementing policies that's gonna potentially, bite you in the ass. So instead of
Yeah,
focusing on the guy and what the guy is like and if you like him or not, no, like do your homework, man. Understand that when you're when you're voting, hopefully taking, because you could have a vote that's completely useless, as in the case of like Russia, let's say.
yeah.
Uh, you're taking part in a very complex situation. Do your homework. Understand that you're voting for not the person, but how that person is gonna do a certain job, and what are they gonna do?
And
What could they change? Right?
and
Don't fall
also
for.
whether that person is going to build up institutions that will be there for your protection and the
Yeah,
development of the country for a longer
yeah,
period of time. Like I think people have too short of a vision when they go out to vote. I
hundred
think that's
percent,
one of the
100%.
reasons, this ends up happening. In fact, I don't know if websites like this exist in the States, but I think for every country, when a person runs for elections, similar to how we
Hmm.
would declare, okay, this is the wealth of that person. In Pakistan, you declare your assets, like this is what I own. These are the number of cars, gold, money, real estate that I own. I think at the
Hmm.
same time, if that representative representative has been in a position of power before, the track record for like these are the bills they voted on, they voted yes on, they voted no on, they abstained.
Hmm.
That sort of stuff should be available. Like when we apply for jobs, right? When you apply to university for a master's degree, you put all your credentials out there, right? And this is when
Definitely.
you're paying them mostly to like you're going to pay tuition, you're asking them, can I please join? And these are far less significant things than
Yeah.
being the president. You would
Right.
think that they would, rather than just putting out words into media, you would think that you'd be able to see, okay, these are my tax returns, these are the policies that I voted for, these are the policies that I stand for, something more robust. But that's not the case. And I think that that's something that
Well,
the
that's
world should move
definitely not the case,
towards.
and if I may take a cynical stance on this, rather
It will
cynical
never be the
perspective.
case.
No, not never be the case. I'm saying it
Yeah.
is the case because the people don't look for it. The people
Yeah.
don't care. I mean, if everybody's like, all right, before I'm going to vote for anybody, I want to see all of their credentials. I want to understand it, see it, analyze it. I want to be educated enough to understand what's going on. Like, you just hit like the 18-year-old mark and suddenly you can vote even if you don't know anything about it. No, I want
Yeah.
to see it. I want to understand it. But nobody wants to look for it. The majority of people
So,
don't really care. They can vote and they vote and they don't do anything about it. So why should they show them anything?
so would you say that fascism or authoritarian rule is not just a failing of the political system and the political institutions, but it's necessarily also a failing of the populace itself? So you can't
Well,
necessarily blame always like, oh damn, this is just how it is, this is how our country is, everybody's corrupt. But in fact, it's also like, well, if you've done all your due diligence, you'd really see the negative effects of this. Or maybe if you'd be willing to not be fearful of the others and also go meet people and like,
mhm,
enhance yourself and really do your homework, then maybe we wouldn't have all voted in this, guy who's going to ruin life
right.
for us.
Well, yes, you bring up a great point, but as it is often the case with politics, everything is just so middle ground. Well, it is not.
Right.
I cannot put the blame on the people because first I would have to look at why are they in that situation in the first
But
place.
isn't
I
there
mean,
that old adage that says a leader is only representative of its people?
all right, look,
So like
yes,
Trump is like is a terrible person, right? And like some people obviously, Republicans, let's say, or like CEOs vote for him because they know
mhm,
he's gonna remove some tax limits, like he's going to make them more money. or the
Hmm.
lobbyists, put him in power. Some people
Right.
just like that guy. So, like, but some aspects of who Trump is, those some of those aspects should be representative in his base because they essentially voted that man into power. So, like, I get that it's not necessarily their fault, in your opinion, but I think a sizable percentage, like, some of it is their fault.
All right. Here's what I'm gonna say. I will look at, if I, again, this is not necessarily written in stone or for me personally, but if I had to make a coherent statement, right, a kind of rule for myself, which is I don't have, but let's say I do,
Yeah,
I would look at a country and I would look at their education system. I would look at the resources they have. What are the chances of people getting education, learning things? Do they have public libraries? Do they have access to information they want to have,
yeah,
et cetera, et cetera? Basically, the epistemological state of a country. And if I see that it is actually in a good state, but the people are choosing to remain ignorant and so vote for, let's say not really great people, let's say vote for a Donald Trump, then yes, I can say, you guys suck. This is what you deserve, right? You had the
you know
chance
what?
to,
That's fair. Yeah,
yeah, you had the chance to, you have everything, and you're deciding to remain ignorant. So I do blame you. It's like, it reminds me of another comedian, George Carlin. He was saying, yeah, I'm not going to blame the politicians. It's I blame the people. It's like garbage in, garbage out. The people suck, so the politicians suck. I agree with that statement if the country is in a state where the people can have access to all the information in the world, right, like the USA.
nice. Okay, yeah, that's valid points all around. To be honest, I really like this. I know we mostly just took, let's say, the book's title and we had this conversation, but this one was quite interesting. I really, really
Definitely.
enjoyed it. I wanted to ask two questions. One, the information you shared regarding ISI, import substitution, industrialization, is that
Yeah.
something that you read up in the book, or is that something that you know from
No, it's
elsewhere?
not in the book. Yeah.
Okay, because I was considering reading the book then,
No, it's
but I
not from the
guess
book.
okay. Then, my other question is, does the book mention or are you aware of any female fascist leaders?
Any female fascist leaders? No.
That's odd. I wonder why that's the case. Is that just because they're more, there's already a gender imbalance in terms of politicians, the male to female ratio, and
Yeah.
that's just, yeah,
Yeah,
okay.
that's definitely. I mean, think of how many, historically speaking, and also just talking about the current world today, the ratio of male to female leaders, whether it's in a parliament or a president.
Yeah, that's true. So I
You know,
guess it's
you have
only
more
a
guys.
consequence of that.
Yeah, your probability of having more, male fascists is higher if you have more male, characters, right?
Right. And
Yeah.
so I think, as always, when we reach the end, the question is, how much would you rate this book out of time, out of 10?
All right. Here's what I'm gonna do. First half of this book is great as far as general knowledge is concerned. You can learn not a great deal, but you can learn. It's like a good introduction to fascism, fascist rulers, what they do, what they say. The second half of this book, she just basically talks about her own opinions, and she relates it to Donald Trump, which is fine. But I mean, look, if you're gonna try to explain fascism to a fascist and tell them that fascism is wrong, you're gonna want to leave your own opinions out of it. Honestly, you're gonna walk their road and take them out of it, walk them out of it. You can't just like slap them out of it. You can't just say, "Ah, you're wrong, man," or blah 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 blah. Look,
Yeah,
they can read about Hitler, they can read about Mussolini, they have the internet, right? And they still decided to be fascists. So just saying that, hey man, look, these guys are bad guys, is not gonna do it. I want to put some more effort into it. So if you're gonna write a book and call it Fascism a Warning, better give a pretty good damn warning, and make it very clear. And
right.
so I think I'm gonna give it a 4. I feel like a light 4 out of 10.
4 out of 10.
Yeah.
Well, that's the lowest we've scored anything, but I mean
Yeah.
that's fair.
Yeah, man. Like, come on, man. This is a
That's
pretty big
fair.
deal. You're gonna
Yeah,
take on such a beast of a subject, and you gotta do it justice, in my opinion.
can't argue with that. Okay, great. Thanks so much for this. And I think next week we will try to cover. It's a book called Upstarts by Brad Stone. He's also Upstarts covers the life cycle of how the founders of Airbnb and Uber started the company, the challenges they faced up to a couple of years ago, and how everything went. He's also written Brad Stone's also written the book The Everything Store, which is basically the same thing but for Amazon. So
Okay.
I think it'll be nice.
Rule number one: be rich.
Yeah. Not necessarily, but I
Not
think,
necessarily.
but it like what we'll find out is it helps where you're starting your startup in the sense that, if you're working in Silicon Valley, there's a lot of money available, and
Oh
that
yeah.
really helps you take over the world much, much faster. But let's save it for next episode. That's it for me.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you all for listening.